My guest on this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast is Lorrie Thomas Ross. Now, Lorrie founded Web Marketing Therapy to help get great organizations on the right path to marketing success. Very much kind of in, I would say, a similar mold and similar kind of role to the way that I've shaped my marketing consultancy. Really kind of getting quite fed up with seeing great businesses, their leaders and their teams struggle to understand what marketing is about and actually getting to the heart and the root of the value that we marketers actually bring to organizations. And one of the things that Lorrie prescribes is happy, healthy, and wealthy marketing solutions. So that's where I want to begin. Welcome, Lorrie, to the show.
Thank you so much, Neil.
Yeah, happy, wealthy, healthy marketing solutions. Kind of give us an insight into what that means for you.
So I will start by full disclosure. I say that I'm a recovering salesperson, and that was my entry into the world of marketing, was being a seller of online media. And before that, luxury retail, couture clothing, all of that. I never thought of myself as being good at sales, but my entire career, and I started in retail at the age of 15, I was winning sales awards. Everyone said, "You're so great at sales." But the reason I was great at sales wasn't that I was pushy or self-promotional. I was a good educator. And whether I was selling bedding and educating people about the different weights of duvet covers or cosmetics or $30,000 gowns, there was always this educational component, whether it was the story of the designer or learning and understanding what the client's needs were, cut to selling advertising. And I was literally plucked out of my luxury retail career by a client who said, "You should come sell advertising." And it was the dot-com boom. And that was 1999. And that's a whole other podcast, because those are some wild times. I was asked years into my advertising sales career to stop selling advertising, but to flip and to start buying advertising to acquire customers. And I found that not only was I great at sales, but I was great at marketing, even though I didn't have a traditional marketing background, because I could negotiate well, but I could also manage marketing in a way where I was writing copy for banner advertisements or landing page copy, all in the name of education. And so education became, and always has been, the heart of what I do. And I love to teach that education is our North Star. And if you still Google today the definition of marketing, you'll still see definitions that say things like the act of pushing and promoting, icky, yucky, like psychologically icky words. But what it boils down to is how we effectively help our audiences understand. And that's education. And so when we start to retrain our brains that sales and marketing isn't stressful, it isn't yucky, it isn't pushy, but if we just focus first on what we need to educate our audiences about, our current customers, our ideal audiences, then we start to have this new found enjoyable relationship with marketing. And suddenly the answers start to become more clear. And instead of fixating on the tools of, the Instagram or the video, or should I do 5 videos or 10, let's focus first, not only on the tools, the science, and all that, the technologies, the data, or the art of it, and how pretty it is, but let's focus on the heart. And if you do that, then everything starts to fall into place.
I'm seeing lots of different kind of threads all kind of coming together in your world here. And isn't it fascinating, from somebody who's kind of grown up as I have with, a lot of marketing theory, textbooks, kind of learning the so-called best way to do marketing from some of the gurus of old. Actually, what you've done is you've kind of approached this with a very simple concept from a very different perspective, just with the art of successful communication. I mean, this is very much human to human interaction, isn't it? Rather than lots of kind of, say, marketing theory.
Right. It's all about connecting people. Whether we're selling products or services, there is that connection. And I think of the sales funnel, which includes awareness and communication and connection and service. All of those get us to sales. But if we're connecting and we're thinking about how to connect effectively, you'll see that correlation of education in the way that we communicate. And it's not only effective, it's ethical. And it just dissolves all of the ick, yuck, stress, overwhelm.
Is it then, do you think, that we've consistently, as kind of marketing as a discipline, talked the wrong story? Because, and I'm very much looking in the mirror as I ask you this question, Laurie, because I've, self-proclaimed not been particularly good at this over my career in marketing, is particularly when I was working in large organizations, trying to forge those relationships with, particularly with sales, let's say, being completely misunderstood, being kind of seen very much as an outsider, not really sort of getting that resonance with people who clearly have a like-minded agenda. They clearly want to be successful, as I did, but just failing on every single count, being misunderstood, not getting the value that I could bring across, and almost sort of sidelining myself. Do you think that's quite a common thing for marketers to be doing?
It's common for marketers to get in their own way and to overthink things. And, in the era of ebooks and YouTube videos and everyone's got a course and all these things, you can actually have information overload. And while it's essential to continually learn and educate yourself so you can effectively educate your audiences, anytime there starts to have like the fog or in the overwhelm, it is time to probably disconnect and reconnect and go back to what's really important. And so much of my work on a day-to-day basis, running web marketing therapy, my agency, and whether I'm coaching my clients' employees or working directly with leaders or ensuring projects get done with my own team on behalf of our clients, it's all about keeping that focus on relationships. In academia, we talk about the definition of marketing. The definition of marketing is often described as the act of maximizing exchanges, which sounds very transactional, and it is a correct definition. And that can be website visitors, email signups, leads, phone calls. It does take an average. I believe HubSpot's latest data said it takes an average of, I think, 8 touch points to make a sale. And again, sometimes that's 20 for some, and sometimes that's 3 for some. I look at marketing as the act of maximizing relationships. And that focus and having that more warm, fuzzy, if you will, approach, again, starts to break down the stress of what tool or how many times a week, or I'm looking at months and months of data. Great. Data is amazing. Data is wonderful. And it's also there to help us make incredibly wise decisions. But we can't lose sight of the heart. And, really, we talk about the art of marketing. I like to talk about the heart of it as well.
Yeah, that's a nice approach, isn't it? Because I think what it's trying to do there, I guess it's attempting to do, is to kind of almost buy time. Because if you're in a relationship transaction, if we call it that in the loosest sense, so it is quite nice because then it is an interaction, it's a conversation, it's not a monologue, so it's a two-way flow or exchange of energy and information. Hopefully then to try and forge some kind of common ground that you can then relate to in the longer term. Is it all really about almost buying time? It's kind of giving us the chance to express our kind of individual views and almost sort of do a little dance around, sort of common sort of perspectives, I guess, to try and sort of spend a little bit of quality time with the other discipline or the other person to allow time, because without time, you can't just switch this on. You can't just click your fingers and it's like, hey, we've got a relationship. It is a patient game, isn't it, really?
It is. And I use the analogy of, would you walk into a bar and say, hey, who wants to get married? Do you expect anyone to say, hey, me? And if someone does say yes, I would be very afraid. We have to date before we get married. And you used 2 beautiful phrases, Neil. You said dance, and the other one will come to me in just a second. But it's like the dance in that connection. And really it's just the quality. That was the other word. It's quality over quantity, but this concept of a dance, right? It's back and forth. And I live in the world of geekiness. I am looking at Google Ads data on a day-to-day basis. I am looking at ROI, and I'm talking with clients about, lead funnels and all of that. But I'm also using my brain to also critically evaluate what the logical next steps are. How do we optimize? How do we leverage these things so that we're doing things in a smart, not hard way. And to that point of dance and quality, it does take time, and there are ways to expedite that time. And that does come back to this concept of education, and how do we use, whether it's the ad or the social media posts. A lot of leaders, just their own thought leadership is an untapped piece of the marketing puzzle. And how are we staying out there? And in that name of multiple touch points to get to a sale, how are we building trust? And just the psychology of a sale. Think about if I were to say, hey, Neil, I know someone who'd be a great person for you to work with. Give them a call. And if you reach out and say, hi, I'm Neil, Lorrie Thomas Ross said we'd be a great connection, psychologically, you're in the selling position. And that puts the audience in that like, versus you saying, Lorrie, thank you for thinking of me. It would be great if you made an email introduction. And I said, hello, my contact, Neil, would be a wonderful connection. And here's why. Suddenly you come in as the expert and as someone who has the knowledge. You're educated, and that gives you more power, if you will, in the sales process. And so how do we find ways to build credibility, to build visibility, to build our usability, all of these support sellability, which for those of us who are in business for the long haul, which is the majority of us, unless we're trying to sell tomorrow, is scalability. And so we have this 5-factor framework at Web Marketing Therapy, and our logo has 5 puzzle pieces. It's about putting those puzzle pieces together, and it's credibility, usability, visibility, sellability, scalability. And to that point of quality in the dance, there are ways to build credibility in testimonials, in video, in thought leadership, in content that keep us out there for prospective clients, but also our existing clients. And we always have to remember, to your point, you make this connection. Well, again, like, why aren't we nurturing that more, and because those are the people that will refer us or come back and grow. There are some businesses where it's a one-time fix. Like years and years ago, when I built my business, I started my business in 2005. We worked for an organization that did tax problem resolution. And those are not repeat customers. You usually fix that problem and you're off trying to find your next customer. And same with law. Usually it's a legal, like let's say it's a real estate dispute or something. You fix it, you move on, or an injury case. But for most, and actually, even if you do a great job as a lawyer for a client, they'll still refer you. And so even being out there with content, you might have a friend who's like, I am just, I'm dealing with a landlord dispute, or I'm, my contractor is not answering my emails. I know someone. And it's important for us to think about how do we stay out there. And instead of this, like, I'm so stressed, what can we educate? Did you speak at a conference? Did you write a paper? Did you do a video last year that might be worth being shared again? All of those help the process.
It's feeling less like marketing and sales then, to me, the way you're defining it, Lorrie, and more kind of like partnership with a real kind of big uppercase P. It feels like this is about the win-win for all parties, irrespective of whether it's an internal relationship you're trying to build or a customer relationship. And I guess it's B2B and B2C here. So it just feels that the common thread here is partnership. Am I reading that right?
Absolutely. Collaboration. And actually, our contracts are not called contracts, they're called partner agreements. And we say that first and foremost, we're here to be an extension of your team. There's no dependency. You might build your company and you might bring on social media marketers or advertising people, and we can train them to make sure they have best practices. We don't even have a services page on our website. We have a solutions page. And that is part of the Web Marketing Therapy experience. We are diagnosing, we're prescribing, and we're guiding. And branding's another piece of the education puzzle. When I started my business, it was called, and don't laugh, Lorrie Thomas Web Marketing, because I think one of my small clients said, who do I write the check out to? And I didn't want to sound uncool. And I made up a name right there. And that's what I incorporated as. My clients who did not know each other kept saying, oh my gosh, you're like my therapist. I was so stressed and now I don't feel stressed. Oh my gosh, we got our website back and our webmaster was holding our site hostage, and you came in and you just mediated this conversation, and he's not really a bad guy. We just weren't speaking the same language. And the ultimate for me was someone called me and she said, I got to get on your couch. I got to get on your therapy couch. I'm like, that's it. But when I was in my late 20s running a business, working primarily with very alpha male leader types, to be in a place where I could confidently say, you're being a danger to yourself and others, and I don't want to go on record supporting you in that decision, and I get paid to be great, not nice. Having a brand that backed that whole thing up was instrumental in me being able to speak my truth. And it's not just about us having value as marketers, it's about us being true to our values. And so while there's the outbound messaging that we do on behalf of our companies or clients, for us as marketers too, we need to also do what we believe in. And sometimes that means letting go. You can't save everyone, is what we always say. And there's times where we just say, look, I need to just be really honest with you. I know you may be hearing this, or maybe, another entity is suggesting or shoulding on you. My favorite thing, like, don't let people should on you, right? There's a lot of coulds, but you need to be a critical thinker. And there's been times where I've just said, you need to do what you need to do. And sometimes they'll come back and go, oh, you were right. But when you lead with love as a marketer and you love what you do and you genuinely can get behind the organizations that you're serving, it's just about doing the right thing.
You talk then about kind of almost speaking the same language. I just want to go a little bit deeper into that one, because that seems like a real thread that runs through all of this, is that almost like it's obviously there's the active listening bit when you're forming the partnership or getting into some kind of relationship, be it personal or professional. And the way that can be done or expedited is very much talking the same language. But you've got to understand the language of the person you're having the conversation with before you can really understand how you then adapt your own. So there's a lot of kind of active listening, be it through market sensing and listening to your customers, or if it's an internal thing, actually listening to the pain points and challenges of your colleagues. It feels like that should be the start point. I've used the word should, but it could be the start point for a successful partnership.
Yeah. And that's where should, it does make sense, because, you're not saying, oh, you should do this, and I haven't really listened to you yet. Listening and understanding is key. And also listening and paying attention to things that may not even be spoken. And that can take time in the collaboration and the relationship. There are sometimes organizations that want change, but they don't want to change. And they can say all the right things and have the budgets, but if they're not willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work, or let a dysfunctional vendor relationship go, or, have that hard conversation, then there's only so much that you can do. And so many times we'll have folks come to us, whether they're referrals or, people who are coming back to us for, expansion or whatever. And they'll say, I need this. We'll say, okay, great. Let's unpack that. And sometimes it might be like, you will need that, but we actually want to do this first, because if we do this, then this will work better for you and pay off. And so it's definitely listening and understanding, but also making sure that you're providing additional options, which is, again, education. It's not selling. And sometimes for us, it's anti-selling. I know you think you need a brand spanking new website. That was actually one of my meetings before this. One of my clients is a phenomenal nonprofit organization. They have a consultant who built the website like 10 years ago, knows it inside and out. And this consultant was saying, so we need a brand new website. And I had my client on the phone. I said, actually, our web lead got into the site and it's rock solid. It's a great site. We just have some constraints on the homepage, and that's the need to have right now. And, anyone on this listening who's been through a website redesign, you need to take a marketing chill pill to get through that kind of stuff. It's a lot of work. And so instead of me signing my client on to a new website and us, billing to facilitate the whole thing, I was like, we just need to fix a couple things on the homepage. And he was like, oh, we can do that. And so saving my client tons of time, and then that allows us to do the real billable work. So whether you're listening and you're making marketing decisions, or you're steering clients into, or your company into decisions, focus on the need to haves, the critical need to haves before the nice to haves, because you are baking your cake in order, if you will, right? You don't put the cake in the oven if you don't put in the eggs and the flour, then nothing's going to rise. Things need to make sense and be in a logical steps.
And I guess much like any kind of therapy, from a personal kind of well-being perspective, there needs to be almost this identification that there's an issue before any of this can start, because I guess we're talking a little bit further downstream when there's either a need or there's a challenge to be solved or there's an opportunity to be leveraged. It means that there has to be some level of self-awareness, doesn't there, either from an organization's perspective or from an individual's perspective, that change is required. What happens when there is this almost kind of, I guess, state of oblivion where people just don't really understand, I've got to change, or something has to move to be able to move the game forward? I mean, if people aren't either self-reflecting or self-aware enough to be able to see that there's an issue, where do you begin with that?
The words that are coming up for me is clear is kind. And clear may not always be what someone wants to hear. And there are ways to deliver messages that can be done in a way that are well received. I am called endearingly by my employees as the no fun lady, which is funny because I actually can be quite fun. But when it comes to we need to say something that's going to be hard to say, I'm the one that will go in there. And conflict is actually really constructive, and judgment is not. And everyone is operating at a pace. Sometimes if you're working in an organization and the culture is one that's slower, that may need more levels of sign off, if there's certain constraints, that is what it is. And so we have to learn how to navigate those in a way that still allow us to be productive and successful. But, having that oh, my company's terrible, that's not going to get you anywhere. Success comes in cans, failure comes in can'ts. What can you do? And so, it could be a really clear PowerPoint that educates the history and where things could go. And going back to that, it takes an average of 8 touch points to make a sale. Sometimes you present something and say, we don't need to do this right now, but I want to make sure that we kind of talk about this, even if it's a 10-minute intro, make it digestible, but then bring it up again. And then, your VP may be in a meeting where it's we need to da-da-da. And it's oh. So being patient, understanding the culture that you're operating in, but also, speaking your truth. And that's not always easy for those of us that are, in the work culture where, we want to keep our jobs and do all that. And, but I've always had this feeling that if I'm not making an impact, I don't want to be there. And I've also found ways to do it with, with understanding of the culture. And I do that now as an advisor, as an outsider, as a consultant who becomes an extension of my clients' teams if needed. But also, when I was in the corporate world for decades, that, there's ways to navigate things. And, and being positive, being professional, and, but education is that, instead of saying well, it's not fair that we don't buy this technology so I can better analyze my data versus, I looked, at this and this could give us this. We don't need to make that decision right now. I just wanted to make sure that we know about this tool, and there's a 30-day free trial offer that when we're ready, maybe we set that month and then we can evaluate those kind of things, finding little ways to get to yes. Who's not going to say no to a free trial of something? Well, why don't we try it for 30 days and then I'll present the data. And then there you go, which is another sales and marketing hack, is the more you require someone to do, the less likely you are to get what you want. If you say, I need $5,000 for this technology, or I need whatever, versus I found it for free, or I'm going to get a week trial, or I was able to negotiate this, I'll do the data, I'll present it back. You're not asking anything. You're just offering, to do a little more legwork. So all ways things that can be happy, healthy, and wealthy for your marketing.
It sounds like then there's evidence is the key here, because everything that you're kind of saying here, and I'm guessing you are an advocate for evidence-based everything. You've talked about data, you've talked about analysis, you're saying there about providing the evidence. it feels like this is very data driven, because I guess then that takes away from personalities clashing, because you almost have this mediator in between, which is, here's the evidence. You might not like me, but look at the evidence, and it's almost like, is that your kind of comfort blanket?
I am very comfortable making people uncomfortable. In all honesty, I have no issues making someone squirm, because that's where the growth happens. However, in just the psychology of sales and marketing, instead of saying, I think we should do this, to say, I've noticed that when we post more like this, or these posts generate more, or the YouTube shorts are outperforming, that's totally outside of you. So you're not buying what someone's saying or signing off on that. You're just being educated. And so that is always a really powerful way to steer the decision-making process, or change or pivot the strategy, or optimize. We always say that you create the idea, you execute it, and then you monitor it, and you rinse, repeat. So we're always having these conversations, whether it's ads management, monthly marketing recaps, but I'm also just having day-to-day conversations. Some of my clients, let's say they're, I have a author who's a national bestseller and speaker. We actually go through the leads every month, and we're looking at the ROI. And we're always asking the most overlooked and stupidly simple marketing question of, how did you hear about us? Right? There's your big hack. That can be a simple addition to the contact form, or your customer service teams can just ask that question, and we're tracking that. And that is often Google search 9 out of 10 times, but now more and more and more AI. I did a search for, the certain type of speaker that this author is. And so we're always asking, like, how did that pan out? Oh, well, that was a $15,000 keynote. Well, great. There we go. And being willing to roll up your sleeve and kind of get in there and get dirty and ask those questions of, how are things going? How are those leads for you? Is the quality good? Well, they're a little off from last month. Oh, well, what was different? Oh, well, we started this, or let's dial this back. Also, there's times when it's like, we need to scale it back. So having that relationship centered approach, where you genuinely care and you are curious, and that's where you're always making things better. The only constant is change in our world, right? There's always something that is new. There's always competitors out there. There's always someone who wants our job. How do we stay relevant? And it's by being curious, by educating ourselves, by educating our companies or our clients, and having that service-centric mindset.
So I'm loving this almost self-accountability that you're suggesting, Lorrie, because it's kind of almost like, if somebody was listening to this and they say, okay, I've got a checklist now, Lorrie's telling me I'm going to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, do this. Great. Now I take this into the business, or I take this out into the big wide world. And then you take a deep breath and you pause and you think, well, okay, well, I've done my side of the deal here, but nobody else is actually responding appropriately. And I thought, Lorrie told me if I did this, it was all going to be fine. What happens when you kind of encounter misinformation from the other parties, or maybe lack of understanding, and it's so deeply entrenched that it's going to be really hard to break it down? I'm thinking particularly here as an example, understanding what marketing is and what it does. So if you're a sales team or whatever, and you're hearing this newly empowered marketer, because they've listened to Lorrie, going into this meeting, and then suddenly it's like they're met with this wall of, and I'll use the word ego, and I'll use this other word, lack of information and understanding. That can be quite daunting, can't it? Because then you feel potentially on the back foot, even though you might have all of this new ammunition to play with. How would you kind of, coach somebody to kind of deal with that if somebody is pushing back, or a team are pushing back on you as to, well, that isn't actually who you are, that isn't actually what you do, and we don't really understand what you're talking about anyway? How do you cope then?
First and foremost, with no judgment. It is human nature to judge and fear what we don't understand. And beyond that, sometimes there's, the ego, or the, gosh, this could shake things up. I remember sitting at a conference with someone who was a director of marketing for a large law firm. And she says, what do you do? I said, oh, I primarily do marketing optimization. Like first and foremost, anytime we support a client, we come in and we make sure that everything is rock solid. Sometimes that's making improvements or working with vendors to make sure that they're delivering. And I could see on her face, she didn't want someone to come into her company and tell anyone that she maybe wasn't doing the most perfect job. And I smiled. I was like, oh, you're not my ideal client, but my ideal client is the leaders, the ones who run the businesses, who know that every dollar counts and they want to do the best they can do, or the brilliant marketers that genuinely care, that are like, yeah, I can't do it all. And I'd love to have a really smart dream team as an extension. But her ego was totally in her way. And she was like, I'm perfect. And the most dangerous words are, I know. Those together are, I know, most dangerous words, because that just like puts on your blinders. But it's understanding. And I understood that I was not going to permeate this lady's brain, and I was not going to break through to her that day, or maybe ever. And that's okay. In business, we sometimes need to be repelling. And the more clear we are, the more we spend time with the right people and, kind of, get the ones who are not ideal out of our way. But back to the fear or the ego, there's also the fear of thinking it's going to be a lot of work on their end. And I find that comes into play of, here's consultants coming in and I'm already overworked. There is a difference between a consultant and an insultant. And people that come in and crap all over the organization and fly away, get a seagull. They're so much cheaper or free. But there's a lot of insultants. So when I was in corporate, I watched these insultants come into companies and charge top dollar and come in with their pseudo expertise and just, barf all their information and leave, versus consultants that could really come in and say, here's what I see that needs to be improved, which is important because that gives you a clear focus. But here's also the ways that we're going to support you in the process, whether that's training, or we're going to come in, like my team and I come in and we're part of it every step of the way. Because these teams often, when you do get that like crossed arms and there's often that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a ton more work. And so having that understanding, and I'll say like, look, I was in your shoes. I was in your position. Please know I'm here to support you. And you want to work smart, not hard. So you want to create less work, that things are win-win-win. But you nailed it, Neil, with the ego. And some of it is ego, but I would add to that some of it is just fear. It's fear of the unknown. It's fear of the, what could happen. But being willing to have those conversations and to address the conflict, and any of us that are in that uncomfortable place, simple language like, it seems to me like, there's some resistance, or there's maybe some lack of understanding about what we're here to do. But it seems to me puts it on you, versus you're not answering my emails. You're not getting back to me. You language is a deal killer. You language gets people defensive. It gets them like, the comes out, versus it just seems like this. And just to reiterate, I'm here to do this. This is my role. I also will have, when I have had in my, 30 plus year career doing what I'm doing, there have been times where we have had really C- players at companies really rear their ugly heads and show their true colors. And Maya Angelou so famously said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And there have been times where I've had, employees at organizations where I've had some major resistance, or things that maybe they didn't want to have uncovered about the work they were doing come out. And those are conversations that, again, are hard to have, but we get paid to be great, and we don't get paid to say yes and we get paid to make things better.
It's interesting, actually, the way you're describing this, because on the one hand, I'm guessing there's this almost uncovering and celebrating an innate strength in the person, be it yourself or the other person you're kind of building this partnership with. But I guess to do that, there has to be a level of vulnerability on both sides. Where do you stand with vulnerability? Obviously, there's a lot of research, and Brene Brown, famously talks about this, within business. And yet there's still, I guess, And particularly, I guess, from a sort of a masculinity perspective, there's still a resistance to be vulnerable in the workplace, isn't there? Where do you stand? What are you seeing?
I am so fortunate to be a member of Entrepreneurs Organization, and they're a global organization, and they have chapters in all countries and all states all over the world. And part of the framework is vulnerability, and it skews more male, but in certain chapters, there's like certain ones in Asia, there's a more predominantly women-owned businesses. I can honestly say that the leaders that I am in forums with and in meetings with, but also the rule with EO is that you cannot sell. So, which I love. As a recovering salesperson, I love that it's not like, hey, here's what I can do for your business, cheesy blah marketing. But I've had people approach me and say, I've heard about you, or, can I talk to you? Can I pick your brain? And there is this vulnerability, whether I end up working with them or not. There's a lot of giving, a lot of like, hey, let me help you out. Let's just talk for 30 minutes. Oh, it sounds like this. Yeah, actually, you don't need what my company does, but XYZ, or like, here's how you would chat with your employee about this. But yeah, I find that, especially with leaders, and I have an advantage in that I'm an owner too. And so I have, my clients tend to really open up. We sign NDAs, all of that. So I don't see that maybe as much as you would maybe in the traditional corporate world. But yeah, I think I have a unique advantage in that I run a business too. I get it, and I'm able to have conversations beyond marketing that actually are imperative to the success of marketing, because I might hear from someone, Lorrie, I've got 3 years left in this. I want to sell. And I don't want you to, I don't even share that with my team. I've had clients with, illnesses that have said, look, this is where I'm at, and we're going to need to transfer things over to you. And I don't even tell my team, and we get these things prepared. Or clients that might be changing organizations or closing one business and relaunching another. So there is a lot of confidentiality and safety. And that's an important piece. You can't be vulnerable if you don't feel safe.
Yeah, that's a kind of nice thing that I guess all of us can translate into our own situations, because we're talking here about, corporates, we're talking here about startups, we're talking service businesses, product businesses, consultancy. I mean, it's literally everywhere. What we're talking about here kind of is in every facet of business, isn't it, really? It's almost like there's nowhere to hide with the old school way of doing business. It feels like this is a really authentic, open, transparent way of getting back to those transactional partnerships. And I love that phrase, actually. The more I think about it, the more you kind of drip feed more evidence in there. It feels like that's what we're after here. It's got to be open and transparent, because that's what's got longevity, hasn't it?
Yeah, relationships have longevity. A transaction, I think of the like old school credit card machine, like that's a one-time thing. And that's a lot more difficult to go out and, have to remarket and build trust again. I mean, I've outed clients of like, you spend so much time on sales, and if you spend a little more time nurturing the people you've sold, you will spend a ton less on marketing. And they're like, wait, what? You're supposed to be focusing on just my website or Google. I'm like, we're going to talk about the holistic approach. Not all organizations want to go there. Again, you can't have change unless you're willing to change. I do remember being the weirdo in business school, where, my professors would say, start, scale, sell. And I'd raise my hand and say, well, I'd like to have a lifestyle business and work with people I love and have clients I love and have the flexibility to travel and work from anywhere. Again, we were one of the first companies, at least when I started. I was in Santa Barbara, California. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia now. But people were like, you don't have offices? I'm like, no. And I could be here, I could be at the beach, I could be at your office. And I'm also not spending a bunch of time running around all the time. So I'm here to be productive. And that's one of our core values as a company, is responsiveness, which you can't do if you're running around all the time in your car and off to meetings and stuff. So yeah, having a values-based business. But yeah, I mean, there's still the old traditional ways, but more and more, and I've got to credit our millennials. This generation is just so refreshing. They value health, they value wellness, they value personal time. And it's really inspiring, and it needs to be inspiring for those of us that grew up in the, I'm Gen X, we were the ones that got to work before our bosses and made sure that they saw us at our desks before they left. And it's so different now. And I mean, companies are going to have to adapt.
Yeah, I just had a flashback there as you were describing that, Lorrie. It was like, oh, those days. Yes,
You and I
have
would have
many
been waving at
stories
each
from those
other,
days.
waving at each
It'll
other
be
at our
like
desk.
that one day, Lorrie, one day there'll be a different way of doing business and we'll still be going by that point, I think would probably be the phrase at the time. Yeah, frightening. But it is, as you say, so refreshing that we can now have choices. We can do business in our own way, with our own style and our own unique preferences and offer, because I think therein lies the ultimate answer, isn't it? That we will be naturally aligning with like-minded souls. I mean, that is the art of good business, isn't it? You do business with those you enjoy doing business with, and there is no rule book that says you can't do that anymore. It is about authentic business. I want to connect people with you, Lorrie, because I know you've got a lot of work and a lot of words on this topic, and we could talk all day about this stuff. I know it, but you're very busy, so I need to kind of release you, I guess, to the world. How can people connect with you and stay in touch if they want to kind of take something forward or maybe inquire? How can they contact you?
I love to hear from listeners. LinkedIn is one of my favorite platforms. I consider that the interactive Rolodex is a great way to connect and stay in touch. Lorrie Thomas Ross. You can Google me. You can look at my hairstyles over the decades. It's quite entertaining. I'm found on my website, webmarketingtherapy.com. But yeah, I mean, I walk the talk. We're on all platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, web, YouTube, you name it. But yeah, I would love to hear from listeners. Don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. I mean, that's why we do these things. We're here to give. And I had a speaker years ago when I taught for UC Santa Barbara, and he's written now probably by 8 books by now. And when he finished his talk, he said, I'll say I always invite people to reach out to me, and hardly anyone does. And he goes, and if they do, we're elated to hear from you. And so I think that's important for everyone listening, is that, I mean, I've reached out to folks in huge networks, and and they write back. I mean, we're all here to be helpful. So I look forward to hearing from listeners.
Wonderful. Let's keep connected and keep connecting. Lorrie Thomas Ross, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.